Welcome back to the Sporting Eyes show for the 6th of February. We have a lot of topics to get to today. We're going to have a look at some of the best players of the 21st century, have a look at all the injuries that are coming about, sadly, and then we're going to finish off with a couple of the superstars in Jason Horne-Francis and West Coast Harley Reid. But our starting point is with the big report SEN Sam Edmund dropped that St Kilda is willing to offer Tom De Koning from Carlton $1.7 million per year over the next 7 years. They haven't offered that to him right now, but they are prepared to, according to him. There's a few directions to go with this. First of all, this is the landscape. So these life-changing offers, De Koning, Chad Warner, Luke Davies-Uniacke, Matt Rowell, who are all free agents or out-of-contract players, are going to get these. I'll probably talk about that some other time, but I'm going to focus on De Koning and St Kilda. Now, I'm a fan of De Koning. I'm not a huge fan. He's a little older than I think what a lot of us think. He's 25. He's about to turn 26, I believe, in July. So he's about to enter his prime. For a ruckman, he's been a bit of a tease for a while, but last year in a little patch I'll get to later, he was superb. So let's focus on De Koning as a player, and then we'll talk about the link with St Kilda. So a couple of the negatives. He's always had some injury problems, and he's never played 20 games in a season. Now, on the discussion with SEN, Kane Corns was saying that he liked his forward craft. It was better than Luke Jackson's, and I was just looking up. Tom De Koning's never kicked 10-plus goals in a season. Now, that is partly due to because he's never played 20 games, but I'm not sure that he's really a damaging forward because he hasn't proven it so far in his career. But he did have a patch of form that made him the number one rated player in the competition. That was from rounds 11 to 18. Now, I think he was the number one ruck slightly before that, but when he built into form, he took off. And have a listen to some of these numbers. So in 3 games between round 11 and 18, he had 24 disposals, 4 marks, 10 clearances, and 19 hitouts at a minimum. So in those games, in 3 of them, he had those stats. So it proves that he's kind of the modern day ruck, can get around the ground, doesn't win a whole bunch of hitouts, but his disposals, marks, and clearance game is superb. Do I think Carlton should try to keep him? Well, absolutely. I think he's obviously improving rapidly at 26 or at 25. He's about to enter his prime. But can they keep him? Well, there's no way, because how could you turn down $1.7 million? I'd be shocked if Carlton could even offer him $900,000. Their salary cap's tight. When you got stars like Wiedering, Curnow, Mackay, and obviously Patrick Cripps, you do have to let some players go. And it's why they lost Matt Owies, and in part why they lost Matt Kennedy, because they got to sacrifice these guys who are on probably $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 to pay their big dogs. Does he fit at St Kilda? Kind of. They have Rowan Marshall. He's been a little bit injury prone this pre-season, but they signed Harry Boyd, who was the Sandford star. I think he won the McGarry medal. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And what I think St Kilda is doing here is just making it clear and a little leak to Sam Edmund that they have big cash to spend. And I think they should be going after Luke Davies-Uniacke over Tom De Koning. So I think Carlton should try to keep him. I'm not sure they'll be able to pay him that much. And if this St Kilda offer comes to fruition and they do offer that to him, it'd be hard to stay at Carlton on probably half of the money, if not less. So you'd think he'd be going to St Kilda, even though I'm not sure it's the greatest fit for them. So it's a strange one, but it shows the money that's going around, and it's a good time to be out of contract or a free agent. Now, our next topic, a little bit of a different one. I've been talking a lot about one of the recent news in the AFL, but on the Herald Sun, they released their best team for the 21st century, but they also listed their top 10 players. So I thought to compare mine with them, I'd do my own one. Now, I'm going to list 10 players here, but I'm not going to go through all of them and give a detailed explanation because it would be boring and there's not enough time. So I'm going to pick about 3 or 4 of the players in my 10 and give you a reason why. Now, for context, my top 10 I'm about to reveal here is about the greatest players, not the best. To me, there's a difference. The best players is just on their peak day, who would you want as the top 10 players, where greatest takes in longevity, leadership, possibly being a captain, premierships, finals appearances, grand finals, finals performances, all of that in my greatest. So that's some context. And also, I was alive in the 2000s, but I was not as aware of football as I am now. So you might see it as a bit of disrespect to some of the players in the mid 2000s. I just wasn't alive to see them. So I have to kind of go off legend, stats, and things like that. But here is the top 10 without wasting any more time. Number 1, Dustin Martin. Number 2, Gary Ablett Jr. Number 3, Lance Franklin. Number 4, Patrick Dangerfield. 5, Chris Judd. 6, Luke Hodge. 7, Adam Goods. 8, Michael Voss. 9, Joel Selwood. And number 10, Scott Pendlebury. All right, so obviously I have Dustin Martin at number 1. That might shock you, it might surprise you, because he wasn't even in the top 10 in the Herald Sun. But I need to give an explanation why. For me, I'm all about finals. I'm all about big game performances, clutch moments. And for me, he just has to be the greatest player of the 21st century. He led those Richmond teams not as captain, but 3 Norm Smith medals. And he's by far the greatest player in finals history, which for me, people say it and they often brush it off like, oh, he wasn't great in the home and away season. He was pretty good in finals and they kind of brush over it. For me, that's everything. How many big players have had bad finals, bad grand finals? You can name a lot. He hasn't. He has 3 Gary Ayres medals, which is voted by the coaches for the best players in the final. So he basically did the clean sweep. I think he's the only player to win the Brownlow, Norm Smith, and a grand final. He did that in 2017. Now that was his peak performance. Greatest individual season. That's what Lee Matthews said. So if someone's opinion counts, it has to be his. So I have him at number 1, above Gary Ablett Jr., who I suppose most people would have 1, but I wasn't a fan when he went to the Gold Coast. In NBA, they call it empty calorie stats. I'm not being harsh, but you can number me to death with that. But 30 disposal, 3 goal games, I get it. He won a Brownlow there. He was superb. A little bit injury prone at the end, and he was okay with his last few years at Geelong. But for me, it's Dustin Martin, number 1. And again, that time at the Gold Coast for Gary Ablett, that puts him down to number 2 for me. The other one, Patrick Dangerfield at 4. That might seem a bit high, but he's probably the best player I've ever seen. Again, not greater than Martin, Ablett or Franklin, but the best I've seen watching football. I have him slightly ahead of Judd, who's at 5. I think people might have them switched around, but Dangerfield he's still playing, has had a bit more impactful longevity than Judd. Judd was great at Carlton, but he was a different player. The first half of his career, he was burst from the stoppage goals. Second part of his career was more of a stoppage beast, ball winner. Again, he still won a Brownlow, but there wasn't much final success where Dangerfield, I think, has picked his moments better. Obviously won a grand final in 2022, was fantastic in that game and in that final series. So I have Dangerfield slightly ahead of Judd, mainly because of longevity. Now, the other one that might raise your eyebrows is Luke Hodge at number 6. He's the best captain I've seen by far. That's why I have him ahead of Selwood, Pendlebury and Voss. You can argue Voss is perhaps greater than him. Again, I wasn't there to see it, but I was there to see it with Hodge. All those big finals performances. He was still a 3-time All-Australian as well, but 3-time Premiership captain, obviously won another in 2008. And for me, his time at Brisbane is still underrated. He spent 2 years there, and in his second year, they made top 4 and played finals. And I think he was a big reason why him and Chris Fagan did really well. And I think it's fair to say Luke Hodge is the greatest on-field coach by far. So that's why he is at number 6 for me. And then Voss and Selwood at 8, 9. Again, you could have them switched. But I do think Voss was a better captain than Selwood. Selwood did only win 1 premiership as a captain, and that was in his last game. But both won the most courageous medal 4 times and have been spectacular. And I have Scott Pendlebury at 10 to round it out. I have no defenders, and I only have 1 forward in Lance Franklin. But to me, midfielders are the greatest and the best players. That's why you have them around the ball. So could have had Scarlett in there. Was even looking at a guy like Jack Riewoldt, who has obviously had a fantastic career. But I'm pretty happy with that 10. And for possible players to move in, Bonampelli, Cripps, Neal, Gawn, Petrarca, and even a guy like Jeremy McGovern, I think in the future, if he plays a couple more years, could get in. So let me know what you think of that. I'm sure a lot of you probably don't like it, but I hope you at least understand with my reasoning why I have Dustin Martin at number 1. But up next, we're going to have a look at all the new injury carnage in big or small deal. All right, time for big or small deal. This is pretty simple. You know how it works. We're going to go over some injuries and I'll tell you if they're a big or small deal. First one, at my Western Bulldogs, sadly again, Liam Jones. This is obviously a big deal. He's been a godsend the past couple of years. 2 top 5 finishes in the best and fairest, one of the better defenders in the competition. The Bulldogs have Lob down there, who I do trust. Some don't, but I've bought into Lob as a defender. O'Donnell, Buku Karmas, maybe Jed Buslinger, okay replacements, but Liam Jones is quality, can't replace that. Fremantle, Shai Bolton and Hayden Young. Now, on the surface level, they look kind of like disturbing injuries, but they're being managed. Bolton has that calf. I don't think he'll play in the Indigenous All-Star game. And Hayden Young has a pretty precautionary hamstring according to them. So they're a small deal to me, but maybe if they keep lingering, I might bump that up to a big deal. Jordan De Koning. Now this is both. He's got a bone bruising injury, has not trained much this week, if at all. So that's a small deal in itself. But I think his injury history over this preseason is a big deal. He hasn't had much continuity. To me, he still looks a little overweight. Again, he's not the fittest athlete ever, and that's okay because he has that power game. So I think it's this small deal injury is a big deal in the big picture. So I'm a little bit worried because De Koning's so important to Collingwood, their best big game player. So it's just a watch on for now. And the last one at Essendon is Matt Guelfi. This is a big deal. They don't have great small forward stocks. He had a career best year in terms of player rating, kicked 14 goals, had a couple really good games. Teammates seem to like him. I do think the fans like him as well. So this is a big deal with his bad hamstring. I think he'll miss the start of the season, and it's going to put a lot of pressure on Kako and Gresham to perform. Without Matt Guelfi, who isn't one of the premier small forwards, but Essendon, who don't have great depth in that area, need everyone they can get. Alright, now that's over with. Time to focus on a couple young stars, and the first one is Jason Horne-Francis. There's been some news out of the South Australian media and AFL.com about Jason Horne-Francis, who over this off-season went to the US in kind of a rehab mode. Didn't work on his explosiveness or his game that much, but injury prevention and things of that nature. I just wanted to discuss about his growth, his impact. I originally thought he would be a bit of a slow burn, but he's proved me wrong, and these are some numbers I'm going to compare him with to some of the superstars in our current competition. So last year he was incredible, his best year by far in just his 3rd season, 24 games for 22 disposals, 6 clearances per game, 27 total goals. He was dynamic with Butters and Rosie. So keep those numbers in mind, mainly the 22 disposals, 27 goals. So at the end of his 3rd season, Patrick Dangerfield, 16 disposals, 3 clearances and 26 goals. So he beats Dangerfield across the board, doubled Dangerfield's clearance total. That's interesting. Petrarca at the end of his 3rd season, 20 disposals, 2.6 clearances, 19 goals. Sweeps him easy. And the other one I could compare him with was Marcus Bonampelli. He was 24 disposals, 4 clearances and 26 goals. So he's about on par with Bonampelli, and we know how good he is, obviously right now, and was from 2016 onwards. So he's been one of the better younger players we've seen for a long time, Horne-Francis, and I still don't think he's getting the credit he really deserves. Obviously, he did leave North Melbourne. Does that tarnish his kind of reputation a little bit subconsciously? I think so. But if he was playing for, again, Collingwood, Carlton, one of the big Melbourne clubs, I think he'd be all we really hear about. And I wanted to extend the conversation with Horne-Francis, who wants to play more midfield time and is a big reason why he went to the US. Can Rosie, Butters and Horne-Francis be this year's version of Warner, Goulden and Heaney? That's a big question, because I think Sydney and Port are really similar comparisons this year. think last year those three midfielders for Sydney really carried them, kind of hid the deficiencies of their forward line, especially with Amati and McDonald. And I think Port Adelaide's in a similar spot. They don't have Marshall. He's out for the year. And Charlie Dixon retired. So it leaves them with Georgiadis and Lukosius. I'm a bigger fan of Georgiadis than Lukosius. Don't trust Lukosius's in-game motor. He can come and go and drift a little bit. So if Port Adelaide are to do what Sydney did and get to a grand final or finish top four again, I think Rosie, Butters and Horne-Francis are going to have to match what those three did last year to hide the deficiencies that I think we can all see in this Port Adelaide team, especially up forward. It's a really interesting comp. Both of those midfields, Heaney, Warner, Gould, Butters, Rosie and Horne-Francis. And Horne-Francis is a big part of that. So if he can kind of go to another level, maybe hit Patrick Dangerfield's probably the best comparison. If he can hit his 2015, 16, 17 form, and then Port Adelaide might be okay because a lot of people have them dropping down the ladder, but that midfield's formidable. And if those three can replicate what Sydney's midfield did last year, they're going to win a whole lot of games. So as good as things potentially look for Horne-Francis in the upcoming season, Harley Reid, who took the competition by storm last year, not doing so well. Interrupted pre-season. Mystery lower leg injury that we haven't heard much about. Has kind of missed practice games, been a little bit hurt, coming in and out of match simulation. It's been a little bizarre. But I think this is not too surprising with Harley Reid. There were kind of murmurings that coming into his first year at West Coast, he wasn't the most professional athlete. And there was a picture that surfaced earlier in this pre-season of kind of the West Coast players coming out. It was a photo, and Harley Reid looked to be a little bit tubby around the stomach. Again, he's a power player, so that's not the end of the world, but it wasn't a great look for your first day or one of your first days of pre-season. And I compare him with, say, Riley Sanders at the Bulldogs. He's come back lean. Josh Gabalak, who does a great job reporting on the Bulldogs, said he's lost 7 to 8 kilograms. And obviously we haven't seen that with Harley Reid. Now, before I said Horne-Francis, I thought would be a slow burn. And I did think the same with Harley Reid. And I think that is coming to the surface right now. Those power athlete guys, Petrarca, Dangerfield, they can take time, kind of 4 or 5 years of stagnation, and then they seem to explode. Petrarca is probably the best example of that. He was kind of a 20 disposal, 1 goal a game guy for 4 or 5 years, and then in that 2020 season took off. So I do think that Harley Reid might suffer from the second year blues. We saw it with Mateus Philippou last year. Again, it's not uncommon, and I don't think it's anything to be disturbed about. Interrupted pre-season, power athletes can take time to really get fit and go to that next level. And I'm still sure we'll see Harley Reid in his spots, be breathtaking as he was last year, and he might be able to win West Coast a game or two, like he did against Fremantle in the first Western Derby. So just wanted to put that out there. It hasn't been the smoothest pre-season for Harley Reid. Not sure he's taken care of himself as good as some other second-year players. So it's a wait and see, but it's not great signs that Harley Reid, can explode like Nick Dacos, say, did in his second year, although they're different players. Thanks for watching the Sporting Eyes show for the 6th of February. Have a great Thursday, and I'll be back on Monday.